3PNR with Adam R. Welcome to 3PNR. I'm your host, Adam R. And joining me for this episode is Mike Huberty, paranormal investigator. Mike, how you doing, sir?
Pretty good, Adam. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for being on. I appreciate your time. Let's start with this. Let's go. What got you on this path?
Well, the paranormal stuff is always something that I've been fascinated with. And, I would say that, even when I was a little kid, and so I'm in my mid 40s now. So when I was growing up, we didn't have, the paranormal investigators on TV all the time. If you wanted to watch something like this, it would be In Search Of with Leonard Nimoy that you have to get on. It would be something like on That's Incredible or Real People would have a ghost story or a werewolf story or something like that on every once in a while. And my sister and I were always really, really into it. And so whenever that kind of stuff would be on TV, whenever they would have a real life paranormal story on a news program or something, we would always be the first people and glued to the TV screens and really into it. And then I grew up in southeastern Wisconsin, and so you have this tale of this haunted house in Horicon, Wisconsin, which is a small town in the middle of the state. But the haunted house there gets featured on Unsolved Mysteries. The police are involved. It goes on the news in the Milwaukee area where I'm from. And so we get a haunted house on the, on the evening news when I'm 11 years old. A couple years later, you have the Beast of Bray Road in Elkhorn, Wisconsin, which is about 10 minutes away from where I grew up. And so now we've got a werewolf that's making the local news when I'm 13 years old. And so you have this, we were always fascinated with ghost stories, always fascinated with local legends and the things in the town. And then all of a sudden, we have paranormal stories on the regular newscast with the Packers scores and the Brewers scores and, the mayor and things like that. And then the next story is Haunted House in Horicon, check it out, And so those little things, I guess paranormal stuff never felt that weird, because we'd always juxtaposed it with the rest of the stuff that was going on in Wisconsin.
Yeah, and it can't be weird, right? Because someone's got to go out there and do the research. There's a thing where you have scientists saying, "Oh, they're not real," and so be it. But if you're going to turn around and look at a paranormal investigator and ask for proof, then I ask scientists to prove that it's not real. Right? Flip side of the coin. It's irresponsible to say something's not real unless you put the due diligence and the work to say otherwise.
Well, I do like to kind of knock out any kind of pedestrian explanations before we get to something supernatural. As much as you can, you try to say okay, what could this be that had a very simple explanation? So you look for the Occam's razor thing right away, and you're like, excuse me. And so you look for the Occam's razor, the simplest explanation right away. And then you start saying okay, well, it can't be the moon because the moon wasn't out. It can't be a trick of the light because more than one person saw it at the same time. It can't, you keep on going through the things until you're and you find out that you can research things, and the more you look into it, the more fantastic it becomes.
Yeah. For me, before this podcast, I thought when we passed the computer, our brain, when that turned off, it was over. That was it. And since starting this podcast and interviewing people on podcasts, and I do a lot of off-podcast interviews,
sure,
I've evolved the way I think. Our consciousness and our soul, I think, are one and the same. I think it's raw energy, and I think there's a greater construct at hand. And I think Earth is a proving ground. I say this a lot on the show. I don't mean to go over it again and again and again, but I need people to understand this is a theory I'm sitting on. And for someone like me to evolve to the idea that there's definitely something post-life, that's a big deal. Now it's a matter of discovering what it is, and that's going to prove hard on science. But as far as the paranormal, there's enough going on where I'm convinced that there's something supernatural to some of these reports. There's no question to that.
Well, I think that there's a couple of things in what you just said that are significant. Number one, it's that the paranormal isn't just, I believe in ghosts, or I believe in energy, or I believe in aliens, or those kind of things. The paranormal is tackling the big questions of existence in a way that's looking looking at the world from a way that's not 1,000% materialistic. And so if you say like, okay, everything's materialist perspective, that all we know is in our brains, that we're all these separate entities that don't have a connection except through the very physical. I mean, it's this idea that the world is material, which has served us well in building roads and bridges and taking us to the moon and all the things that came with it. And it's very natural for humans to explore the world in also a non-material way, from, ancient religions to people that go to church every week and, pray the rosary or, all those kind of things. It's very natural for us, the humans, to try to explore and look at these big questions. And I think exploring the paranormal is a great way to tackle these big questions and also be able to talk about these things with people where, you might not have a theological discussion just off the bat with somebody, right? You're talking about how many angels can dance on the head of a pin or whatever, like the bishops used to discuss in the 16th century. And so you may be like, okay, we're not going to discuss theology or biblical stuff, but we still want to kind of tackle some of these kind of things. Let's talk about these supernatural experiences that people have had. And it's not just, it's not just people when they're drunk. It's not just people who you think might have some mental instability. It's regular people that are not even attracted to this kind of thing have these experiences. And now let's see, what might that lead to in kind of discussing the big questions of the universe. And I really think that makes it fun to talk about, fun to explore, and exciting. And it's one of the very basic human traits to explore the unknown and look at it through a spiritual perspective.
Sure. And it's we're questioning our mortality. We're investigating because especially there is that question. It's a big one. What is after this? All right. Did everything I do here make sense? Did I do the best of it? So especially with religion, it's kind of funny business for religion. Predating religion, it's been spoken of spirits and the paranormal. This isn't like something that we invented in modern times. This has been around a long time. And I've spoken to some paranormal people and said, well, if we're energy and some of our energy gets trapped here, like in other words, when you pass, if you don't get recycled here, or if you go to the next plane, if you're stuck here, in other words, if a ghost here, if you die here fast, like a gunshot, it's instant, your energy's still here in a state of what just happened? What's going on? Right? So then imagine energies that are around pre-existing humanity, and in their eyes, this is their planet. What are you doing here? Same as the haunting for a house when it's the old man's house. He's not exactly being a jerk to you. It's his house and he doesn't understand you being here.
Sure.
Funny thing real quick. I heard this today. I want to say it to you and get your idea, but I was watching a scientist talk about the paranormal and how he was basically debunking it. And, he started referencing dates with Jesus, and Jesus was born on 4 BC. And I thought to myself, wouldn't he be born at 0 BC? Because
right, you think.
Because I don't know how they came to that number. But in the midst of him debunking this, it's because he was interviewing scholars that were involved in religion. And then I think to myself, well, wow, energy's it's been on this planet, 4 billion-year-old planet. Energy's just been here. So how are you going to go to religious leaders to ask about something that predates them? Strange.
Well, it's also the idea, though, that, if you think of the way that, think animism, which the most ancient form of religion, the idea that everything has some kind of spirit, whether it's a person or an animal or it's the spirit of the mountains. It's the spirit of the land. It's all those kind of things. And what you're talking about, this idea of energy. Now, of course, we're going way out there with things that don't have any particular kind of scientific proof, but that's still part of the fun in talking about this kind of thing. So if we talk about animism and the spirits of everything. and the idea that, I don't know if you ever read American Gods by Neil Gaiman.
No, but it's been recommended. I'm going to have to.
And that's that kind of idea that, let's just say, all the ancient gods of Europe, all the Indian great spirit legends here in the United States, let's say they all had some truth to them, and there really were avatars that represented people's belief, is kind of where that comes from. But, if you're going to say that, like, everything has some kind of life force, and I believe, now don't quote me on this, but I know it was a Greek philosopher, and I believe it was Socrates, when the people were, when Socrates drank the hemlock, and he died, and he really was sentenced to death or whatever, and decided to drink hemlock and kill himself. But when he was talking to his students and saying, like, don't worry, because there's a spark of life in each of us, and that spark, even if it's out of our body, never can really go out. And I think that was Socrates. So that's me. I might have learned that at the university, pulling out of my ass. But there was a Greek that talked about this, and I think that's what you're getting to. That energy of that there is there something to our consciousness that is outside of what's created by the electrical impulses and the hormones and the neurotransmitters in our brain. And if you take something like what Mitch Horowitz was just talking about at the they're just with Hereticon that they just did last month, and that was this big convention, and Mitch Horowitz comes out and does this, you can find it on YouTube, talks about how ESP has been proven in the lab scientifically by parapsychologists for decades. And I even did this when I was a psychology student in experimental psychology. I did an ESP experiment where we technically, using statistics, proved that ESP exists and I had 30 people that I did. So that shows you how you can use statistics to extrapolate an experiment with 30 people to 1 million people. But this idea of non-physical communication has been proven in the lab over and over again, that somehow people can transmit messages to other people without any kind of physical touch and without any kind of space limitation or anything. There's a way that people are doing these experiments and they can send a message. Now, it's not something we can control. It's not something that's completely repeatable, but over time, the experiments show, and they have been able to reliably repeat the above chance, this communication happening between human brains, non-physical communication. And so now you're saying, okay, well, what does that mean? That means that everything cannot be explained just by what's in our brain and the chemical messages and the electrical messages and everything that goes between them. And so somehow people are able to communicate with each other without any physical form. And if that's possible, then what are the possibilities of, and obviously this is a big stretch, to move from non-physical communication to the independence of consciousness outside the body, but it does go against the materialist perspective, which would say the only way that two people can talk to each other is through like speech or writing or electronic communication or some way that things physically pass between them. And that, to me, like, once you open up to that, like, okay, now we've repeated that scientifically again and again. They've been repeating this since the 1970s, that people can somehow send certain messages to other people just using the power of their minds. Once you start with that, now it opens up a whole other realm of possibilities, I think. That's really exciting. It's just, we got to figure out the next way to research it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in support of that. I'll tell you why. A lot of 3-letter acronyms have utilized the idea of psychic abilities. Remote viewing. This isn't, it's not like, in other words, if a 3-letter acronym for the government is willing to put some resources behind this to check it out, something's got to be there.
Right,
and,
Project Stargate.
Yeah, and so if you look at the human brain, and I say this a lot too, it's currently, right now on Earth, the most complex computer existing right now. And if you look at our body, so the brain is inside of this machine, our body, right? And I think personally, this is my personal thought, the energy possessed in that is, we now know in modern times that information can be stored on energy, right? Fiber optic cables, for example, we could send information almost instantly through fiber optics. So when you, I think what happens to the human body as you get older, it deteriorates. In other words, the vessel's going bad and your hardware is going bad. So the software, your consciousness, or it has to go through a process where it's going to be recycled, right? Because right now, the thing that's running our machine is downloaded to us, and that's what I think is our consciousness. I think that our energy, especially, I've been doing this a lot lately. Not at the beginning when I first started getting into all this, I didn't comprehend it, but you look at the construct of the web, the cosmic web, and you look at the brain, the way it's developed, and if you look at everything on Earth, it has a very similar pattern to it. Looks like it's by design. So that being said, I think that there's a lot of, and what you're saying about communicating with 0 words, just like a knowing, our computer, our brain, there's a lot of capability there we don't use. We don't use all of it. There's a lot of incidences where people get into an accident and all of a sudden they can play piano, or these amazing other abilities start to emerge, because when you damage one part of the computer, like any other part of your body, another part has to compensate for that. So you don't know what part of the brain you now is compensating is now capable of utilizing these abilities.
Well, that's exactly right. And so we all have, there's a ton of potential in each of us. And a lot of times it can be achieved through focus or concentration or if you get the situation where the people get knocked in the head or things like that, it's because that area of the brain, then if physically you start concentrating all your energy and efforts into those kinds of things because of damage. I mean, the most interesting thing I think has always been the psychological effect of a phantom limb syndrome, where someone can have an arm chopped off or a leg chopped off, or maybe that person will never have had an arm or a leg. But because that part of the brain that would register the arm or leg is underused, the parts next to it get bigger. And as the parts next to it get bigger in the brain, they start bumping into the neurons that would make you feel that arm, make you feel that leg. And so all of a sudden, people feel pain in a limb that doesn't exist, because it's their, it's their mind interpreting signals, or it's the neurons acting like they're actually getting sensory input from that part of the body.
Well, yeah, so it's the software.
With phantom limb pain, right? When you talk to somebody with phantom limb pain, they'll be like, "No, I feel my arm right now. I can feel it. It hurts. It doesn't exist." And when you're talking about the software and the parts of the brain that are that can be activated and used, like there's so much we understand on the conscious level, and there's so much we understand on the subconscious level.
Yeah,
and we got to keep on knocking those things out to try to discover more, because I think we'll discover new ways of hopefully physically improving and helping people with mental health issues and all those kinds of things as we kind of learn more about the complexity of, like, as you said, the most complex computer on the planet.
Yeah. And, think about this, the brain, your computer, it has the software and the design. In other words, it knows your machine has these parts. Now, if you're missing a part from the machine, the computer doesn't register that. So it's still sending signals to a phantom part, right? So that's how I imagine it to be anyway. So for you in the field of paranormal, I imagine you've done some investigations. What have you come across let's start with what compelled you the most?
Well, so majority of what I do is like research of, look into haunted history stories. I do history of buildings and things like that. And we set up my company, American Ghost Walks. We have tours in a whole bunch of cities to the Midwest: Wisconsin, Illinois, Minnesota, and now California, Hawaii, and Puerto Rico as well. And so a lot of it is talking to people that have had experiences and going into how that might relate to other people that have had similar experiences in the same place, how that relates to the history of the place, and how that relates to the history of the town. So for my job, I kind of put that all together into a fun way for people to take these different tours of different cities, whether it be Chicago or Minneapolis or Milwaukee, Madison, where I'm at, and put that together. But the most compelling things that I've usually discovered are either things that I've experienced myself that led me to believe that, okay, there's something we can't explain. And the first time that happened to me, I was in high school, and I was with two guys and their girlfriends at the time, and I was the guy riding stag or whatever. And we're all hanging out at this one guy's house, and it was a fun night or whatever. And he's like, I want to show you this really scary tree on this trail. And he had all these stories about this tree that, I'm like, all right, let's go check it out. I'd love that kind of thing. Like, let's go to a place with some kind of folklore. This particular marsh that's outside of Milwaukee, where there had been some violent, there'd been some murders and stuff out there, actual murders, not just like, oh, we heard somebody died out here. Like, no, somebody like threw the body out there a couple times.
Right.
And so there were some scary stories because some bodies had been found at this particular place. And I'm like, we should go check it out. And I'm walking, and the two guys are walking along the path, bright moon out at about 10 o'clock at night on a Saturday. And walking down the street, or walking down this path in the park. And then I see a sign with hunting regulations. And I'm looking at the sign, and I can read most of the sign, except there's a shadow in front of it. The shadow of a person. And it's pitch black, and everything else around it is reflecting the moonlight. Not this thing. I think I'm just seeing things. I'm like, maybe it's a shadow from the tree or something. And I look, and the girls I'm with see it as well. And the guys are about 20 yards behind. And they're both stopped in their tracks. One of the girls starts crying. And I'm like, oh, and then we're looking at this, and she gets some kind of sense off it that there's something wrong. And I still am thinking this is a trick of the light, right? Looking around, I'm closing my eyes. I'm trying to but you can see it, and it's this shadow and just sitting there. And and we all see it. And then the girls run back, and I'm there, and I look back at them, and I look back at the sign, and now I can read the whole thing.
Huh.
And now there's no shadow or nothing. And so we all saw something together that was definitely a humanoid shadow, and we all saw it. And the only reason I even think that it's something is because we all saw something, and because they freaked out about it. And that was like, okay. I remember called my sister the next day. I'm like, I saw something last night, and I'd never seen anything before in my life.
Huh. I wonder if that thing saw you and was like, oh shit, it sees us.
It might have. Right. And other people have reported something similar in there since then. And this was before, so this is the early 90s. So this is before like shadow people like was a thing. Like I'd never even heard of it before, like just seeing a shadow of something. And I remember like 6 years driving in late at night and hearing Art Bell talking about how's your experience with shadow people? Has anybody experienced shadow people? And like I called up on my cell phone, and then I ran out of battery right as there was an answer. I'm like, no, I could have been on coast to coast. But that was the first time I experienced something where I'm like, okay, this is something that several people experienced. None of us can explain it. There's something going on, and I'd like to know more about it.
Have you returned to that place?
Oh yeah, we went back a bunch of times and didn't see anything.
Yeah, I think personally, what happened there is that it was looking at you, and then it's like, wait, I think it's looking right back at me.
Right? I mean, I can still see it. I can still see the look in those girls' faces. And this is 28 years later, and it shook them. Like it shook me a little bit too, but they're more sensitive than I am, kind of thing, and just shook them. And so that kind of I'm like, well, it may have been a group hallucination, but then that's still interesting to me that three people, different people, can see something, the exact same thing, all together, all describe the same thing, and have it be something non-corporeal.
Yeah, I'm one of those people they call dumb brave, right? Because an example, when I was a kid, I told the story so many times. There was in Florida. I live in Florida, and we would sneak out at night and go manhunting. Right, we play manhunt with our friends. Sure. And one night, there's a park and there's a lake, and on the other side of the lake's a wooded area. And I wouldn't say a forest; it's Florida, but there's wooded. And so there was the moonlight out there, and we assembled our teams. Who's going to manhunt? Who's going to hide? And everyone said they saw these what looked like shadow figures across the lake. And I turn over and I don't see anything. I'm like, what the? I literally start running to this. I run all the way around this lake to the area they were pointing at. I didn't see anything. I remember being so pissed off. I've never witnessed anything in life at all, which is really, I'm getting involved with the podcast. I'm eventually going to travel and do a documentary, which, as I'm learning, is probably going to be a serious thing because there's so much. Florida alone, I'll be here for 5 years. It's crazy.
Well, there's plenty of great stories in Florida.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like so I'd have to leave this state and make this my last stop, or else I'd be here for 5 years. So,
well, that's not weird to never have seen anything though, because I think about that's one of the few times that I saw something that I say that. I mean, I've been up investigations and heard stuff, but this is something where I'm like, well, I have no explanation for. My sister, who I work with at our ghost tour company, and she's done paranormal investigation and stuff, and she writes and everything. I remember we were at this place in Wisconsin that has 1 million ghost stories, right? And so sometimes it has so many ghost stories, you're like, okay, you start to believe it less or whatever.
Right.
And so we're at this place, and we were doing a live podcast, and my band played a few songs. It was a nice night, And I had a couple beers. My sister she's just a teetotaler, right? So she's got nothing. And we all leave that night, had a fun time. And then a couple days later, I get a call from my sister. And she goes, I can't believe I didn't tell you about this that night. Because I saw an orb. And immediately I'm like, an orb, come on. She goes, no, not in a picture. I saw an orb in real life come up to my face, look at me like it was looking at me, and then zoom away. And she goes, and I saw it, and I thought that was weird, and then I stopped thinking about it, and I didn't think about it again until right now when I called you.
Huh.
And she goes, I didn't believe in that place. And she's like, now there might be something going on there. And that was one of the first times in her life, in 1 million paranormal investigations she's been on, where she's seen something to the effect of, this is something I can completely not say is a maybe. It's, what the hell was this orb of light that came up to my face, looked at me, and then zoomed off?
I speak with Steve Murr. He's a parapsychologist from England, and he does really extensive research. And, he's been on the podcast a few times. Like, every time I talk to him, I always leave the podcast with way more to think about than,
Sure.
I never sleep well because of you, Steve, if you're listening. But here's what I've come to, again, this is a theory. This is what I'm running with. The orbs in ufology and the parallels of the orb for ufology and the paranormal. I kind of think that, here's what I think. So we're being observed by a higher race, right? An intelligent alien species, right? And for them to do what they're doing, they definitely didn't come here as a biological thing. I think it's an uploaded thing, but that's something separate. The point I make is they're observing us. And while observing us, they see these other things, which are the spirits, etc., essentially, right? And so I kind of think wherever there's a paranormal activity, I think that they're on higher intelligence utilizing an orb as like a drone, right? It's a sophisticated machine technology to try to understand. So the parallels with the orbs, I really, really believe, or this is my own belief system, that they're observing that as well as us. Because there's so many parallels with the orbs. It's an insane amount. Like I've yet to come across a case of orbs where that same region didn't have an overwhelming amount of ufology going on.
Well, that's an interesting point. And, as long as we're reaching out into speculation and talking about stuff, One of the most interesting books I ever read on the paranormal was Josh Cutchin's book on the scent of the paranormal. It's called the Brimstone Deceit. And so brimstone, the smell of sulfur, and how there's so many paranormal experiences, whether it's a UFO, whether it's Bigfoot, whether it's people that say they had a demonic experience, whether it's people that say they have a ghost experience, sometimes a religious experience, the smell of brimstone shows up. And so you're like, okay. And so when you got to thinking about the higher beings or whatever, it made me start thinking about Terence McKenna and when he would go into alternate states of consciousness, whether it be through psychedelics and stuff, he reported people and himself, because he was a psychedelic explorer, but a lot of psychedelic explorers talk about once they kind of get into the psychedelic frame or whatever, it's like looking behind the curtain. And they talk about machine elves, is the way they describe it, is that there are creatures or something, fairies, trolls, whatever you want to call them, that exist behind reality. And so they get, through psychedelics, is how they have seen people, or they've seen these beings, entities, who are behind in the clockwork of reality, in the putting on of the great universe kind of thing.
Right.
And they talk about that. Okay, so let's say people, you talked about software before, right? And so if you think of your brain, your consciousness is some kind of operating system, there always is kind of a program mode in an operating system. There's a way that you can go into, in Windows, you used to be able to go to DOS. In the Mac operating system, you can go into Unix.
Yeah, backup. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
And so what puts us in a program mode? Is it brimstone? Is it that smell? Is it, if we smell something and all of a sudden we're into program mode, and then and then something happens, and then how do we explain what we see? Well, we could say it's whatever we believe in. We believe in angels, we saw an angel. We believe in Bigfoot, we saw a Bigfoot. We believe in ghosts, is a ghost. But for a few seconds or whatever, we were put into the mode where we can see behind the curtain, and now our brain is explaining it with whatever supernatural we believe in. If you're not, if you don't believe in God, you still might believe in aliens. If you don't believe in aliens, you still might believe in cryptozoology. You might believe in Bigfoot, that kind of thing. And so just as long as we're speculating and going in and you're talking about the theories, that's always what I thought was interesting, was that, when I read that Brimstone Deceit book, and then how people were smelling the same thing at a Bigfoot, at a demonic, at all these kind of different encounters, they smell the same thing. Like, well, what does that connect to, where we would come out of something and just be like, people could see whatever they believed in, kind of thought. And so, and your software idea made me think of the program mode.
Yeah, idea. I mean, it makes sense what you're saying, because if an alien appeared to you, or a ghost appeared to you in ancient Egypt, it'd be viewed as a god or whatever deity at that time, with the best that they could. Sure. So whatever they could perceive, it's again, their software's got to be able to perceive what they're seeing and register the information through the computer. So in modern times, I wonder how many people, when they explained the gray alien, when I came to light, when I finally came to be, how many people are like, oh yeah, wait a minute, maybe that's what I saw. Right? I mean, it makes sense. And as far as paranormal, with energies like ghosts, or whether it be demons or whatever it may be, talking about raw energy being harnessed. I said this to a lot of paranormal people. I've heard them say, well, I got a mark on my arm. It doesn't mean it's mean. Whatever it is, it's not in our existence. It has to utilize and manipulate energy to touch you, whether it be a pleasant touch or an unpleasant one. It's going to feel the same. So, yeah, I mean, it gives me a lot to think about. And I like that, what you were saying about how people, like, whether it be angels or demons or however they perceive it. You're right. It comes out of that software. What can our computer do to explain what it is I'm looking at?
Right. And there's so many different ways that we can interpret things. Like, so talking about experiences, they talk about the Mackenzie Poltergeist, which is on at the Greyfriars Churchyard in Edinburgh, Scotland. And the City of the Dead tour in Edinburgh is one of my favorite ghost tours. Really, it's amazing. And the history there is incredible. It's also incredibly sad. The English and the Scots, obviously, if you guys have seen Braveheart, it's not a great relationship for a long time. But you go there and they talk about this thing in this place called the Black Vault. That's near the kirkyard. And you go in and it says that over 300 people have been scratched or grabbed or things by the Mackenzie Poltergeist. And, I didn't even hear about that until after we'd returned and gone on the tour. I went on the tour with my wife. And we're in the Black Vault. And I'm all the way in the back. And I feel like a tapping on my shoulder. And I think it's my wife who's getting scared. And I'm like, I put my arm and I'm like, that's all right, baby. Just to be funny or whatever. And it was the wrong side.
Huh.
So I'm in the farthest back, nobody behind me. I'm up, close to the wall. And I'm like, oh, my wife. But okay. So I just felt something on my shoulder. Does that mean it is a angry ghost? Does that mean it's, what could it be? Also, you get thousands, tens of thousands of people that go into those places every year, and they are putting their own energy there. They are hoping to see something, hoping to be touched, hoping, could they be creating something with their hopes and aspirations and dreams and all those kinds of things? So we take a phenomena and we all try to explain it the best we can. Is it a poltergeist? Okay, well, does that mean that the poltergeist is a consciousness of someone who lived at one time and then died? Or is a poltergeist created by the energy of an adolescent whose psychic batteries are just overcharged? Is it a group of people together like the Philip experiment they did in Canada, where they were able to create some kind of poltergeist phenomena and actually get it on film and everything in the early 70s? Can it be created by a group of people all kind of making the paranormal activity because of their belief and their hope? And so we're taking one small phenomena, me being touched on the shoulder, and then we can extrapolate a whole bunch of different stuff from it. And I think that's what makes the paranormal fun, because we can talk about it, we can explore ideas, we can look at the history, we can create a narrative out of things. And it also lets us tackle the big questions, because if we do believe that there's some kind of consciousness rolling around of someone that used to be alive, that has implications for our life. That has implications for our family. That has implications for all the people we've ever lost.
Agreed. Yeah, and it gives us that rest of ease. Like, well, I guess everything I did here is for something, right?
Right.
Because it's a scary thought. If you go to fear God, God-fearing Christians, right, and say, hey, there's no God. I ask this a lot. How many, I never liked a neighbor. I'm going to kill him. And I'm leaving my wife. Because there's no fear. What if it just turns off? What does it matter, right? So, yeah, it makes sense. I just sent you a link on LinkedIn for this video. It is one of the...
Oh, great.
It is one of the paranormal videos. The opening of it, by the way, too. For those of you that are... I'll put a link in the description so you can see it. The opening one, there's things upside down in a doorway in a house. It's the one video where I see this guy have a real chemical response of fear to it. Broad daylight. That video really affected me. Out of all the videos I've watched, that one really affected me. It's the guy's, I'm not even sure what led up to it, but he's recording on his phone. He's going through his house. And I got the image that he got from it. I put it on my computer. I did, to the best of my ability anyway, tried to blow up this image and try to poke holes in it. I just couldn't. And I'm getting chills now thinking about it. That's the one thing that bothered me the most. I've seen a lot of things don't bother me, Mike. I can handle a lot. That thing bothers me. So
that's the guy. And so what he's looking at is he's like looking through a doorway.
Mm-hmm.
He's got some kind of SLS camera or whatever.
Right.
And so he's looking through a doorway. Oh, okay. I can see that.
Yeah.
He's looking through the doorway and he sees some kind of activity on the SLS through the doorway. And then all of a sudden, there is a shadow that comes across.
It really ruined me, man. Because it gets into the point where there's like some sort of a close up on it where and you hear him run. It's like nope. Like you could. I watch a lot of these YouTube videos. I try to decipher the difference between what is real and what is there just for likes. And I can see a lot of them are just and that's here's a big problem with paranormal. A lot of irresponsible people do these things and they claim it real. Look, if you're entertaining us, there's no harm in saying entertainment. We're going to watch it because that's what we are as a people. But when you're claiming real, you're putting yourself in the same lot of the people that are out there really investigating, doing the work to find these things. And so I see a lot of these.
I don't enjoy the hoaxers or anything like that. I think it's not fun to lie about stuff.
Right.
That takes the whole that takes the whole thing out of it.
Yeah. Then when you want scientists to get involved and really do it, because I'm calling out scientists whenever I speak to them. I'm calling them out. Like, if you want to sit here and say it's not real, you deliver me a 2-year study of you proving it's not, and then maybe you got my vote. But it's not good enough to say it's not real because, well, somewhere in science, it's not here in the books. Like, okay, man. But so anyway, some of these videos, I see these people and they're perfect. I could always tell. I'm a pretty brave person, like I was telling you, by default, like stupid brave. And even me, if I saw something, I'm going to have a chemical response. I'm going to shake, my pitch, the tone of my voice is going to change, my breathing's going to change. And a lot of these videos, I don't see that. But this guy, that video, my God, his response sold me more than the image itself because his response was so genuine. And when I went back and tried to isolate the image of that thing and try to poke holes in it, I couldn't. And that was and only to the best of my ability. But it really creeped me out. I want to find that guy and interview him. I really badly do.
It's interesting to see, though, because like this particular thing, he's in the room with it. And he's just looking at the SLS through the monitor. And so his phone is recording the SLS. And I would have loved to see if he had while the shadow passed, because obviously you see something like that and it's going to be even scarier because he's looking through a camera, through another camera.
Yeah. I don't think he was aware,
but he's physically there.
Yeah. I don't think he was aware in the beginning, that first pass through. I don't think he was aware of that. It's when he realized it was in that hallway. I'm getting chills again talking about it. It's when he became aware that he ran out. He's like, nope. And his breathing was labored and his tone of his voice changed. He had a real chemical response to that.
Well, it's always interesting when something actually blocks the light, because that goes into when you're talking about if we see a ghost or we see see some kind of paranormal activity. Is it in our heads? Are we seeing are we seeing something in our heads? Or are we seeing something that has a physical manifestation that actually blocks the light waves? And so that's the kind of situation where, why would something on the close to the ceiling block the light waves when he's the only guy?
Yeah. See, I'm glad you said that because there's a cast from it too. Right. And I got to tell you, if I again, brave dude, if I saw that, I don't know. I think the dummy in me runs to that to get the best image. And then I turn around and tail out. Right.
Well, he's doing SLS stuff in his own, or wherever he's investigating, whatever, alone.
Right.
So he's already got to be pretty, he's already got to be pretty steadfast in what he thinks.
Yeah. I want to find him. I want to find out what led to that. Because obviously there was the expectation that he was, what I get from that is that he was going to either prove or disprove something. Because he didn't seem to be too, his gait was steady. His hands were steady. His, everything about his posture was good. But when he first caught sight of that, you could always tell because you start seeing that camera shake, his breathing changes, like you could see those things, and that to me that got me, that grabbed my attention. There's only been a handful of videos in paranormal on YouTube anyway that I've seen that I had to call into question, and I speak to a lot of investigators who get good tangible stuff out there, a lot of paranormal guys, none with the videos I see on YouTube. You know what I mean? Because
well, right. I mean, and also what I don't like about the YouTube stuff sometimes is that there is no context presented.
Right.
And so it's like, okay, check out this cool, check out this amazing footage from a, convenience store in Malaysia or something like that.
Yeah.
You're like, yeah, this looks great, but let's see some context. And because the thing is if people do have real footage, a lot of times they're going to want to exploit it and get something out of it.
Right.
I think about there's a club in Stillwater, Minnesota, that's on our ghost tour in Stillwater, Minnesota. And so I remember when I was doing the research and I'm talking to the people that own the club, and the guy's like, yeah, you got to see what we put on our Facebook page, man. He's like, we just had a crazy thing happen on the security cameras the other night. And it was like the liquor cabinet like opening and the bottles kind of falling on their own. And it looked like somebody did it.
Yeah.
Right? But no, what I mean is it looked like somebody did it. It looked like a ghost did it. Like,
right.
It didn't look like it just was opening up and spilled out. It looked like the door opened and then an invisible hand came through and knocked the bottles off. And they weren't shy at all in sharing it. They're like, this crazy stuff happened. You guys should check it out. You know, we got paranormal stuff going on. You guys should check it. And they took advantage of it. They took advantage of the fact that they had some kind of paranormal activity caught on camera at their place. And so when I see stuff on YouTube and everything that has no context and nobody's trying to make a buck off it, it makes me say like, wait, I'd try to make a buck. Like,
yeah, the heartbeat.
If I had real footage, I'd want people to check it out, you know? And so when you see people who are like, I said, this is real. And they're willing to attach their names to it. They're willing to attach that, you know, they're just like, hey, we saw this thing and it's crazy. And you can quote me on that.
Yeah.
I have a deep respect for that.
I agree. I saw a video, like there's some videos, like there's this girl waiting for her boyfriend. She's at a hotel known to be haunted. They were there for that experience. And she's tour. She shows you one closet. It's, this is one, blah, blah, blah. She goes to the next one. And then she pans the camera towards the doorway and it's dark. Now, to most people, that's she goes back because so she has the doorway and then you hear this noise and she looks at the closet she was just in there. It's a big, all her stuff's a wreck. But I caught for a moment. I saw where the editing was, right?
Sure.
I saw when she was aiming the camera at the doorway, a nice dark area, perfect place to edit because most people won't notice it. But I caught the edit. I found it. And so again, there's no harm in doing those things if you want to call it entertainment. But don't pass it as real because it puts the people like you and other paranormal investigators, it lobs you in the same category as them. It's unfair.
Well, and this is my theory on some of that. Not necessarily the hoaxers, like there's that one, that Team 10 or whatever. Like they're like the UFO people on YouTube, and they always have crazy stuff that they fake. But it's the. I think of some of the respected UFO or ghost people that I've seen who they've gone along with things that I think are fairly ridiculous.
Yeah.
A few years ago, there's this thing called the Roswell Slides. And so the Roswell Slides, somebody who's from Wisconsin and someone that I've respected as a researcher who's been to Roswell a million times. He's on the board of the Roswell Alien Museum and stuff. Like he's sitting there trying. He really is someone who is trying to get to the truth of what happened there. And then they have these Roswell Slides thing in Mexico City, and he's there, and he's like, "Yeah, I think that these slides are the real deal." And within 15 minutes that the slides get released, somebody on Reddit shows that it's a complete hoax. You know, and so I see like people I respect. I'm like, why would he even be aligned with that?
It's unfortunate. I'll tell you what it is. A lot of it, there's not a lot of resources for people in the field that want to dig for these facts. And sometimes these shows come along like, here, man, here's $25,000 or $30,000 to come on and speak about your experiences. But you got to stay with the narrative. You got to say this. And so it sucks that it happens. I think, especially in the world of paranormal, I think I say this wholeheartedly. I think with the advance of technology, I think some of the questions that we have about the afterlife and what's around us and these spirits, I think they're going to get answered soon. There's some geniuses out there that they're not doing it with the purpose of finding the paranormal. These applications are more like things like Neuralink. and things like other products that they're trying to use right now to measure space time and to find alterations in physics here in our geology. I think some of this technology is going to shed light on it because it's playing at the quantum level, right? So,
well, I mean, hey, Thomas Edison thought that he could create a phone to the dead.
yeah,
Tesla thought that he was talking to people on Mars when he was, working on radio, when he was, creating, these guys were, creating the first non-physical communication by using radio waves. And I think your point about the money is also something important, because I think a lot of these people who've been in the business for a long time and done research for a long time, I think a lot of them go by, they're like, well, it doesn't matter until we get the smoking gun anyway.
right.
So if I get the smoking gun, it doesn't matter what happened beforehand. It doesn't matter if you didn't believe me beforehand, because I will have something incontrovertible. And so when I think to them, I'm like, oh man, why would you lose your credibility? I think to some of these people, they're like, look, I've done this for 30 years and still most people don't believe me. So I'm just going to try to earn some money, and then hopefully one day I'll have the peace. I'll have the peace that can convince everybody.
I've spoken to some ufology people and paranormal alike, and they got some strong evidence, but they, it's a full-time thing, man. They put their blood, sweat, and tears into it, and they've lost families over it. They lost careers over it, but they found great data. And, sometimes they're painted into a corner. And here, on the flip side of that, so let me tell you, before I even got involved with the podcast, I wanted to approach these subjects clean. I've had no experiences. I've never witnessed anything. I've never investigated. I wanted to be clean. I wanted to come in this as a fresh mind who's going to interview people and learn things. And I'll tell you, back in September, I did an off-podcast interview because I was collecting data and to get an idea of what direction to go in. And I have a conversation with a physician. He's a teaching physician, and adjacent to the hospital is this large building that all the students go to. So he's in the building night prior, setting the place up for oncoming students. And, his only experience, and this guy's an atheist. I spoken to him for a couple minutes about who he was and leading up to this. And he goes, I just want to speak about it because I found him through a Facebook, common Facebook friend. And sure. I promised never to reveal his information, but he heard I was going to do this. And he's like, well, I have something to tell you, but I don't want to share it. I was like, sure. So he's in there setting the place up. In his peripheral vision, he sees someone standing there. He's like, you can't be in here right now. You have to leave. And he turns over to it. It wasn't like it disappeared. He said it, his words were deconstruct, but it dematerialized directly in front of him from head down to feet. And it ruined him. Like it wrecked him. And he never saw it again. Or he never even had another experience, but that was so profound on him that he spent countless hours trying to process it. He never really investigated because he's a physician, a teaching one nonetheless.
Sure.
But years of his life were like, well, I don't even know. He tried to digest that the best way he could, without damaging his credibility, I guess.
Well, I mean, that's an interesting thing because I feel I've talked to a lot of people who say they don't believe in ghosts. And they'll give me some story that's like an amazing, if it would happen to me, I would be a true believer. Yeah. I'll talk to somebody like, I don't really believe in ghosts, but there's this one time I was driving and I was going pretty fast. I wasn't paying that much attention. And then I saw my grandmother in the rearview mirror. She told me to stop. And so I immediately hit the brakes and I ended up not hitting a kid.
Wow.
It'll be something like that. And you'll be like, what? He's like, yeah, but I don't believe in ghosts. But your dead grandmother saved somebody's life while you were driving. Like, to me, that's, it's like, oh, I don't really believe in ghosts. But I tell you what happened is that when my father died, he appeared to me and my brother the same night in a dream. We were together and we both had the same dream. And you're sitting there going, okay, maybe it's not a ghost. Maybe it's not the physical continuation of a consciousness after death. But it is still something.
Yeah, like a collective consciousness, and that was their representative.
Right, beyond the realm of comprehension.
Right. So in my notes here, and I take a lot of notes. Like I still handwrite things in the 21st century. But so what you were saying about the brimstone, I got, I don't know, this is a large number of people associate the smell of sulfur around some paranormal activities, specifically in near waterways. So I found that interesting.
Yeah, and that's why it's important to check out, I think, Josh Cutchin's book, The Brimstone Deceit, goes into all these different things of people smelling that sulfur and brimstone and all those kind of things at different
Yeah, make sure you email me that title, by the way. I want to look that up.
Sure. Nobody else has really explored the different kind of paranormal smells. They've talked about Bigfoot. They've talked about, obviously, the smell of rotten eggs when it fills the room. Often they'll smell that during a exorcism kind of thing. And, we have the Exorcist Conference takes place in Mundelein, Illinois, near the Wisconsin border, just about an hour and 15 minutes from my house every year.
What time of the year is that?
I think it's in springtime.
I'm going to try to get out to some of these things. I want to interview.
That one's only for priests.
Oh, all right. And so I have to rent a costume and kind of pretend, right?
But you can't. No, but you can. So my sister Allison, she's gone to the Mundelein Seminary library and gotten several books in exorcism that are only available there. But it's interesting that they do have an exorcist convention for the Catholic exorcists, and it takes place in Mundelein, Illinois, not too far away from where I am right now. And they have, I guess, the latest in technology of whatever that is. What's the power of Christ can compel you.
It's funny you mention that. So exorcisms, I think, only work on entities that had existed here. Because if you think about the older energies, I did another I love my off podcast interviews. They're not long, but they're informative. And one gentleman of Catholic descent told me that some of them don't respond to the exorcism from priests because they don't recognize the language. They don't. To them, it's, in other words, these words mean nothing to them. They're from millions of years ago. So they're like, well, I don't know, this guy's making gibberish over here. What's he trying to tell me? So, but it's funny because in Egyptian times, they would have to, and I should have wrote it down. There's a process they went through to remove dark energy. And it was not too different than lighting candles, something of that nature. And then it made me think, what if there's some sort of beings that were here? Imagine this planet's 4 billion years old. And people say, well, there's no way things lived 2 billion years ago. It was a hostile place. We don't know what they breathe or what their biology spoke to. We have no idea. So what if there's entities around that they predate all of humanity entirely? How do you get rid of them?
Well, I mean, that's an interesting idea. Like this idea that, that's of some kind of antediluvian entity, that is, an ancient force, pre-human kind of. I think that's when people talk about the idea of the fairies, it's not necessarily fairies in the way of, Tinkerbell or something like that. It's more like fairies are elementals of the earth. They're representatives, or it's an alien intelligence, but not necessarily, it just means alien to human. Just means something an intelligence that exists alongside us that we cannot comprehend. They're not human. You can't appeal to humanity. You can't appeal to pity or the things that make humans human. Right. The idea that, we're social creatures. We want to do things to make people happy. We want to do things because we're stronger in numbers. There is no humanity to appeal to in a thing like a fairy, because it's a intelligence of a completely different kind.
Right.
And so when you talked about creatures that might be millions of years old, that's what it makes me think of, is that when people talk about the fairies, or, in every different culture seems to have them, whether it's animism, where you're talking about that the rocks have energy and life and things, or it's, leprechauns, or it's in Hawaii and the Menehune. Like all these different cultures seem to have some kind of elemental,
right,
that is alive, that is an alien intelligence alongside us. And so when you talk about that kind of thing, and the exorcism you discuss when you're like, well, it's not like when you say when you do the Catholic prayer or whatever, the creature doesn't get it. It's also the power of the belief inside the person. If you think of an exorcist, if you have somebody that's in let's say a tribe in Papua New Guinea or something like that, and there's a Catholic missionary who's trying to do an exorcism versus the local shaman or the local medicine man, who might also be trying to drive out an evil spirit. They might be doing similar things in the functions of their particular religions. But which one is more effective for the person who's afflicted? It's their belief, right, and the kind of things that they're dealing with. I
wonder if it has something to do with like who puts forth the greater mental strengths. Like if a priest and a shaman and a rabbi walk in, I would think whoever's putting forth the greater focus of energy to remove that thing would be the successful one.
And we have no idea how these things, that's the thing. You're like, okay, exorcism sounds crazy, right? But still, there are thousands of exorcisms performed every year. Like you think it's just something that happened with mentally ill people in the Middle Ages. No, like there are
I saw years ago. I saw this little comic strip years ago where there's a priest. He's doing an exorcism. And he's like, you got to leave or whatever. And the demon's like, why? Because you need to leave. He goes, who are you? He goes, right. And he starts, chanting, you must leave this house. And he's like, you must leave me alone. I was laughing. It made sense to me. It's an energy, right? It's how much focus and strength you put behind your words, I imagine.
Well, and you also wonder, the victim, like what's happening to them too. Like
yeah,
it's interesting. So I had a good friend. All right, but still is my good friend, but he's not into paranormal stuff anymore. But he got into investigation before I did, even though we were the same age. But like while I was in college and playing music and working on things like that, he was getting a social work degree while also doing paranormal investigation, and he eventually got kind of disillusioned with everything. And I remember when he said, like, I don't want to do this anymore, was because he said, yeah, I don't know if I believe in ghosts, but I believe in evil, and I believe in child abuse, and I believe in alcoholism. And and he goes in and he's like, this, almost all the situations where people were calling us to come investigate ended up being houses where there was some kind of abuse going on, where there was substance issues and all that kind of stuff. And then you think, okay, is part of that, is paranormal activity, or is part of that just lying to get attention? Is part of it, could a very abusive household or places where there's a lot of negative energy and negative attitudes and all those kind of things, can that express itself in negative paranormal activity? Or also people in those situations when it comes to addiction, are they leaving themselves open to some kind of malevolent entity caught wreaking havoc or convincing them to make bad decisions? So there's all those things that kind of come together when you're trying to look at a case in the paranormal, especially when it comes from a problem home or something like that. And you're trying to say, like, would these paranormal activities end if this family was normal? Would these paranormal activities end if that dad or that mom who's abusing the kid went to jail? And so you had to kind of, like, there's just so many factors.
Yeah, you're right. I'll tell you why. Some of the investigators I've spoken to, particularly the female ones that seem more inviting, it's like the spirits of children approach them more often. And if your environment's very negative, I imagine it's going to attract that energy in all levels. All right. If you're very positive, like, you don't ever hear about ghosts hanging around like a house full of happiness and are being rambunctious, I think they just kind of coast along. Like, this is a pleasant environment. I'm okay with it. But the darker ones, sure, because they found a source of negative energy they could feast on. It's something they're adapted to.
Well, and when you think about the people that keep maybe a small shrine in their house, or they light a candle to a saint, all those kind of things,
Yeah,
you can do it in a lot of positive houses, where they might experience some kind of good paranormal activity, or like you said, like, okay, excuse me, but in the places with a lot of positive energy, they are, it's like, oh, it's a big family. People are happy. Maybe they're church going, all those kind of things where the positive energy seems to follow them. And if they do have something happen, it's usually not terrifying.
right.
It's usually something in the way of, oh, I felt granddad in the room, or something like that.
Right.
Here's something weird. Let me tell you. Speaking of a positive paranormal experience, and this was something that took me aback. And this happened a couple of years ago in 2019. So one of my ghost tour guides was a friend of mine from high school. And, after high school, I didn't talk to her for a long time until I was looking for a ghost tour guide in the town where she was living, or, real close to the town we went to high school together. And so she becomes a ghost tour guide, does a tremendous job, and is just a really nice girl. And she gets killed in a car accident. Somebody stayed up too late. I think he was doing meth or whatever the night before. Falls asleep on his way home from work, crosses the center line, kills her. Just a horrible accident and tragic. And so I hear about this, and I'm like, that's really sad. She was a great girl, and very nice friend, and all those kind of things. And so this is maybe a week after she had passed, and I walk. Excuse me. I got to go to my band practice space and grab some stuff. And so I walk outside to my deck, and I walk outside my house, and I see a hedgehog looking at me. And I live in Wisconsin. A hedgehog. And I'm like, well, that's a hedgehog. It stares at me for a few seconds, and then it kind of just goes and runs under the deck. And this is in November when this happens. And I'm like, that's weird. I've never seen a hedgehog in the backyard before. And then I text my wife. I'm like, hey, I think there might be a hedgehog in the backyard. Just want to let you know. And she's like, she starts going through all these different rodents and stuff, right? She's like, is it this? Is it this? And I'm like, no. And she sends me, and I send her a picture. Like, they look like this, a hedgehog. And she goes, that's impossible because they don't live in North America. I didn't know that. All right. I'm sorry about that, nature lovers. I had no idea hedgehogs do not live in North America. And so I'm like, that's weird. Well, I'm like, this is what I saw. So maybe somebody had a pet that escaped. The next day, I'm thinking, like, why do I know this? Why do I know what a hedgehog looks like? I mean, I forget about it. So once my wife says, and then I go ahead to do some work and do some band stuff and all that. And so I didn't even think about it till the next day. I'm like, why do I know what a hedgehog looks like? And I realized that my friend who had just passed, that was her Facebook profile.
Ah.
She had two hedgehogs that she loved. And I'm like, wait a second.
Was that a perception on your psyche, maybe?
I have no idea. Right. I have no idea, because otherwise it would have to be some kind of neighbor's hedgehog pet escaped, because they're not here naturally. And I'd never seen it before or since.
Huh.
And it's sitting there on my deck looking at me. Jumps off, flies under the deck. And I've never seen it since. And that was really something that I was like, well, I meant to say like positive paranormal experiences, but that to me, if we're going to think of it as seeing an animal and have it some meaning to it,
Yeah.
I think it was like, hey, I'm okay.
Well, it can be classified as paranormal because it was parallel to your normal, right? I mean,
It definitely was something, because I was like, and I'm just like, I did not think it was a paranormal experience at the time. I was texting my wife, I'm like, isn't that funny? You know,
it's strange because I had an off podcast interview some while back. I think it was like June. It was before I even started doing a podcast. I was just trying, again, data collecting. And I was reaching out to people, and this guy was telling me about he left his house. He had priests there. It wasn't even bad. It was a dog barking in the middle of the night, every night, nonstop. And I wanted, in my mind, I was like, are you just maybe crazy? But it turned out his wife heard it, his kids heard it, the neighbors heard it, and they just left the house. And I never followed up with him because I mean, I didn't even know how to ask questions. And I'm like, oh, I've never encountered that before. So who knows? It could be that's her spirit and what you perceived it as. I mean, it's not impossible.
right. And it's also, I mean, I've heard that before, that people see an animal that they associate with someone
Right.
soon after their death, and that's their sign.
Yeah. I mean, this person was close to you. So maybe again, when you see it, your brain's defaulting, right? Let's go to something that's acceptable to look at right now.
Oh, I know. I really, that was the last thing on my mind. I didn't know that it was unusual. I feel stupid because my dad was like, what? There's no hedgehogs living in the United States. What are you, an idiot?
I didn't know that either, actually. So.
I'm like, sorry, Dad. I really didn't know. I just thought that Sonic was a thing.
Yeah, I didn't know they were here either, so don't feel bad.
But that's the thing too. But that's the kind of like a positive thing where you're like, oh, it was someone saying goodbye, or someone saying, hey, it's okay. And that kind of little things like, that's the positive paranormal experience. That's not being scared.
Yeah.
That's being excited that you got a little glimpse of something truly fantastic.
Indeed. For me, it's not that when I tell people I've never witnessed anything, I always try to tell people, like, don't think it, I never put myself in a position to do so. I was shooting pool or hanging out with friends, or I was always on the go. This concept of this podcast, this idea for this came through COVID. So I was at home. I had really nothing else to do, and I started watching it. I've always been fascinated by the subjects. It wasn't until COVID came around I started watching more videos and documentaries, and I was like, all right, that's it. I got to know. You know what I mean? I'm going to ask the questions. I'm going to reach out to the people. I got to know.
Well, usually there's some kind of event that happens to a lot of people where they have a paranormal event happen to them, and then they start getting into it.
Yeah.
Or, I mean, a lot of people, and we get calls like this on the ghost line all the time for the tours. We have a 1-800 number for the tours. And sometimes people just want to hear ghost stories because their mom just passed, or all the kinds of things, or their wife, all the kinds of things, the tragedies where you miss someone and you hope you get to see him again someday, and it makes you feel good that other people have had experiences that show that there is some kind of survival of consciousness, and that's a comforting thing.
It is. Especially when you're questioning your own mortality, it's a very comforting thing. If right now a ghost appeared to me tonight in my house, I'd be okay with that. I'd be like, okay, well, now I know to a certainty, beyond any reason of doubt, that after here, there's something, and I would be comfortable.
It was funny. I think about one of my friends from college who's now like he was studying to be a brain surgeon, but I think he just elected to be a regular surgeon, and he works out at a hospital in LA now. And we were laughing about it one night. He's like, man, if I saw a ghost, he's like, I don't lie. I'm like, I'm not lying to you. I'm going to crap my pants. Because I would be happy because I would know there's something more than this.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe that's why I don't see anything. I'm like, oh, we can't. So if we let this guy see us, he's never going to leave us alone. Right? Right. I got so many questions. Hang on. So it'd probably be a big part of it. I'm like that. Like I was telling you the story, I run this stuff. That's why when I get in the field and start doing documentary, if I come across even Bigfoot, the likelihood that I'm going to meet my demise is pretty likely because I'm going to run right at it. I'm going to get a good documenting film. because it's not good enough for me to get an image of something from a distance. I see too many of those videos already. For my own sanity, and I guess for the pleasure of those who are watching the doc, I'm running directly at whatever that is.
Well, I hope you do. I mean, I hope it. The one thing I was thinking about, like you're saying, like, so when you do see something truly fantastic, oftentimes it doesn't feel like it. And so that's, when I saw that shadow in the Vernon Marsh 28 years ago or whatever, like that one felt fantastic. I was with other people. We all saw it. And we're like, this is not normal. When I saw a hedgehog, I was like, well, that's not weird. When my sister saw the orb come up to her face and then float away, or, like kind of zoom away, like it was moving intelligently, she didn't even think about it the next day. I got a great story one time from a friend of mine from Toronto, and then I met him at the Michigan Paranormal Conference. And he said he was camping, and it was him and his husband, and they were camping together. And he goes, we woke up in the middle of the night. We went outside, and we looked at the stars. And we looked at the stars, and they were moving. Huh. And he goes, we watched it for a half an hour. We went back and we went back to bed, and we forgot about it. We didn't think about it until a week later, and we're like, hey, remember when we woke up in the middle of the night and we saw the stars moving? And so you never know how you're going to react or what's going to happen, because like, to me, that's they got stuck in a program mode. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, you see the stars moving and you're like, that's no big deal. That, to me, it's the kind of thing you remember later, like, it had my sister or whatever, or it's these little things happen to you, and why don't they seem like a big deal? What's going on that the fantastic, the impossible doesn't seem like it's impossible at the time? And that to me is interesting, because that's a whole different level of paranormal experience. Because you're like, well, what's happening in my brain I'm seeing something that's impossible, and yet I'm not freaking out about it.
It's some people have acceptance that or I'm not, it could be too, let's be honest, paranormal aliens, there's a level of intelligence to this. So I'm sure they could recognize who's accepting and who's not, right? Who's going to be able to tolerate it in certain scenarios anyway. I'll give you an example of me. I get excited. I really get excited. So I'm a kid. I believe in Santa Claus. I mean, I remember being a kid like, all right, I gotta go to bed. I can't screw this up. Everyone behaves really well December. The rest of the year, it's up for grabs. But right. So I had this plan, because I had a discussion with my cousin at the time. I was like, yeah, Santa's real. And he was telling me like, well, no one's ever seen it, blah, blah, blah. So I was going to stay up all night. I got a camera from my grandma's house when I was a kid. I snuck this, by the way, grandma, or, she's deceased now, but eventually I'm sorry for taking it, but I had to for science. So I was going to take a picture of Santa Claus. I stayed up all night, and I faked being asleep. My mom would come in the room, check in. I'd fake the sleep. And I had to know. I had to get a picture of him. And when I saw my parents out there, I saw my father first come out. He's bringing gifts. I saw my mom behind him. I'm like, oh shit. I'll never forget that feeling of just disappointment, the way it impacted me, right? It was devastating. And so that kind of pushes over to my system with, like, as a kid, I was fascinated by ghosts and aliens. And sure. Whitley Strieber had a book called Communion, and later on became a movie. And Communion is about the gray aliens, or his experience there with them. And so I stayed up with my mom watching this movie on the couch. And I'll never forget, the dog of the couch scared the shit out of us, right? But that fascination was always there. And then somewhere in my teens and 20s, I was like, this shit can't be real. You know what I mean? It just can't be. It's impossible, because I've yet to see anything. I have all these friends that see things. I never get to see anything. Did I do something wrong? Fast forward to 2017, the government releases those videos, or I guess leaked, the videos of UFOs filmed by our pilots.
Oh yeah, the Tic Tac.
Yeah, all of these things, like the gimbal, and like 1,000%. Now there's UFOs. What's behind the controls? That's still, for me, I still have my theories, but now I know UFOs are real. And then you fast forward to I'm starting this podcast, because again, I'm sitting on the couch one day, And I got aggravated because like I see all these people that are seeing things and I hear their testimonies. I'm like, why the hell do I not see anything? I'm going to start a podcast. So the idea of the podcast is like for you, you have your tours and all these other investigators, ufology and otherwise. I'm going to have a network. So I'm going to know where to go. I'm going to get out there and search and I'm going to find something because I know right now it's not going to be my parents. So
right.
That's
well, it's funny you mentioned the Santa Claus thing because people have sightings of Santa Claus.
What?
It's right. So what is it? Like we think it's not the actual Santa Claus that delivers presents, but what are they having sightings of?
I don't know, because if it's the real Santa Claus, I'm sorry, he's going to court. I'm suing him.
Well, interestingly, so this is the drummer in my band. She's an engineer. She's, I've known her more than half my life, and she had a sighting of the Tooth Fairy when she was a kid. Like she remembers seeing the Tooth Fairy. Now, okay, she doesn't claim like, oh my God, Tooth Fairy's real, blah, blah, blah. But she's like, I can't say what happened. I remember seeing it. So there's a million different things that could have happened. There's suggestion, there's false memories, all those kind of things. But there's also the egregore, the tulpa, the idea that you want to see something so bad or that the stars align and you see it. And so we have these sightings of things that we think are reasonable. You're like, well, I believe that there's probably alien life in the universe because the probabilities are really high of that. So a UFO from an alien planet makes sense because we can get our wrap our heads around it.
Right.
If you're like, okay, I believe that consciousness exists after death. I believe that energy continues on, whatever you want to believe. And then you say like, okay, so ghosts, to me, that's reasonable. So I saw a ghost. And then you get in something. Then you start getting into places where you're like, well, no, I don't believe in Santa Claus, but people see him. No, and so you're like, okay, so then what we think is weird or whatever goes deeper than just the things we're letting ourselves believe.
You're right. Yeah, suggestion's strong too. Suggestion's a strong thing because when I was a kid, my aunt told me, so I had this neighbor when I was a kid and he had big hair, like an afro looking thing, right? And I asked my aunt why his head was so big. And she's like, oh, it's going to explode. And so I was terrified of this guy as a kid, right? And he was aware of the story. He'd walk by and he'd like do this gesture like, oh, my head's going to blow up. And so suggestion's a strong thing. So much so that in my adult life, there are still myths that my relatives have given me that for some reason, I have to remind myself as an adult, well, that's not real. Because even though you know as an adult, but it resonates. So the effect on your psyche with certain cases, it could play a role there. Also, as I start studying more of this paranormal thing, you realize that some of the energy you're coming across is intelligent. And if it doesn't want you to perceive it a certain way, it won't.
Well, that's certainly a possibility. And, it's interesting. You're saying like, you have memories that are kind of created and, from the jokes and stuff like that, or repeating in your head the whole time. I just had last month, I just had one of my college friends and she texted me and she goes, your roof fell through during a party, right? Or you like your attic ceiling fell through a party, right? And it never fell through a party. But we did have a party where we could start seeing the feet. Like you could start seeing it shake. There were so many people in the attic. That's why we kept the kegs or whatever. Right. Is that then you could start seeing and so once I saw that, we're like, everybody get out of the attic, come back, like go down. And we got everybody out of the attic and it was fine. We didn't have a party up there again. But in her mind, she's like, right? It like the ceiling collapsed. And I'm like, no. I'm like, I think you were there. The ceiling didn't collapse. What happened was we saw the ceiling start shaking. We saw it start bouncing in a way that seemed unsafe, and we got everybody the hell out of there. And like she'd kind of created that memory. Right. And there's a professor, Dr. Elizabeth Loftus, at the University of Washington. And she's really gone in research for the past several decades on how we form memories. And the most interesting experiment that she did, excuse me, just getting over the vid here. But the most interesting experiment that I remember learning about in psychology class was that she hypothesized that she could create a fake memory in someone and they could remember it just like they thought it happened to them. And so they were doing something with like fake diaries, or they were doing something where people were kind of like reading their family's diaries. And so they would insert fake memories into those diaries of things that never happened. And then later on, they would ask the people who were reading the diaries, like about the events, the fake events, and then people would remember them. And that I always thought was really interesting because it shows how creative memory can be.
Yeah.
That we can be things like, oh yeah, I totally remember this. And that's because you see it in your mind's eye.
Right.
And your memory of it keeps on getting created. It's not like something that happens to you and then you have this like rock solid recording of it in your head.
Right.
Your brain is replaying the recording of how it thinks it happened.
Right. So what it is, and this is how I know memories. You know the information, then you now have to reconstruct the image in your head. And depending on the time that elapsed, you're either going to reconstruct a really accurate image or a image-ish to what it was. I met a guy in Vegas in 2010. I was out there for a nine ball event. And he was a mentalist. And I found him to be intriguing. So he's outside his hotel and he was getting ready to go do a show on some other part. He was doing some example cameras around, et cetera, et cetera. And he was using the power of suggestion to give people false memories. And either everyone that he worked on were in on it with him or he was that good. And I wasn't willing to find out. So, because the last thing I need to do is have a memory I don't want. But anyway, before we close, let's talk about your tour and how people could find it.
Sure. They can come visit us at AmericanGhostWalks.com. Right now we have tours in the Twin Cities area, so Minnesota, plus a vacation down in Minnesota called Stillwater. We have tours all over Wisconsin, Wisconsin Dells, Milwaukee, Madison, Bayfield, Waukesha, Lake Geneva. And I think I'm missing a couple more. But yes, so we have tours all over Wisconsin. And also all over the Chicagoland area too. Downtown Chicago. We even have a Devil in the White City tour for people who are interested in H.H. Holmes. We have a Resurrection Mary tour for people interested in Chicago's most famous ghost. And we also have tours in the burbs in Naperville, Woodstock, Aurora. And then if you guys ever go on a tropical vacation like to Maui, we have tours on Lahaina on Maui, as well as Hilo on the Big Island, and in San Juan, Puerto Rico, which is a fantastic tour of one of the oldest cities in the Western Hemisphere with, ghost stories that go back 500 years.
Excellent. Some of my documentary might just be going with you.
We do have a lot of fun, and it is like learning these stories, interviewing people who've had experiences, talking to it goes everything from walking into the local bar and saying talking to the waitress, hey, has anybody experienced anything here, to going into somewhere like San Juan where you walk into one of the Spanish castles, and you talk to the park rangers. You say hey, what have people experienced here? You write those down. You connect them with the history of the place. You connect them with the history of the city. And it's a really fun way to learn about a place through its legends, folklore, and ghost stories.
Excellent. I'm going to have to go into your tours. That's what I'm signed up for.
We'd love to have you.
Mike, it's been a pleasure. I enjoyed speaking with you. We're definitely going to do this again. Any information for your tours, I'll put in the description. I'll get it from you in post. And if there's anything else, hit me up at any time. And to everyone listening, I'll have everything in the description. So this way, get on a tour, Mike.
Sounds good. Thanks, Adam.
Indeed. You have a good night, Mike.
You too.